Happy and blessed New Year to everybody. 2020 was a hard year, but a lot of good things can come from hard things. And this is something I wanted to share with you for months. But some of it was procrastination, some of it was not having the right time or the right opportunity. And then you get to the point where, you feel like if you don't act on it soon, it's just going to go away and it'll never happen. And that's what I don't want to happen. So I'm taking this time now to do it. I'm hoping it's God's providence that is now rather than me putting it off for so long. And I do trust in that. I'm going to share something personal as a way of sharing something with you that will be real and tangible and practical. On the same at the same time, the main goal is to get you to understand some more of who the Father is, what He's like, what His heart is like. And so when we go through things that we want to say, why, sometimes maybe this will answer part of that. Now, sometimes we don't get the why. We have to trust. Many of the times that's the way it is. But you have to know who the Father is. You have to know. And if you don't look for Him, you don't seek after Him for yourself, and you don't read His Word, which is how He reveals Himself to you, then you're not going to know a lot about Him. But I don't want you to go through life thinking that God is one way when He's totally another way. And if you do think this way, or that He is this way, and He is, but you don't get it, maybe this will answer that question for you. Okay? So that's why I want to share this with you. Been debating on where to start because I don't want to go back too far and bore you. I also don't want to give you a whole lot of details that you don't need. So I'm praying that God will just filter that stuff out. Okay. After my dad died in 2005, it was in where I live in Birmingham. It was just me and my mother and my younger sister. And we used to get together every Sunday and eat dinner together and talk and, laugh and share things with each other. And then in 2009, I moved to Lima, Peru, and got married with my wife, and we lived there for 2.5 years, and would probably may still be there if things weren't to change. But what happened was, my younger sister, who's now in her late 40s, she was working at the time my dad was still alive, and then she got to the point where I think either just before, I think it was after he died, that she was still working, and then I don't know what happened, but she either got fired or quit her job or did something. Now, she was living in and renting a small house that my parents owned, and she was paying rent and paying her own bills and stuff like that, and then she quit her job or got fired or whatever. I don't know, remember what happened or what she told us. And the idea was that she was supposed to get back on her feet and start paying her own bills and start paying rent back to my mom at a very reduced rate because it was a house and she was a small house, but she was paying rent for it and should have, as an adult, she shouldn't get it scot-free. And then at some point she kind of started isolating herself. She got to where she didn't get a phone anymore, and she didn't have email anymore, and we would go visit her, and she lived about 30 minutes away, so it was very intentional, if we went out there to see her, which we wanted to do, especially on birthdays and holidays and stuff like that. Sometimes she would answer the door, and sometimes she wouldn't, and it was like, when we got to see her, it was great, but we noticed that things were going on that were just kind of weird. But that was before I left, okay, and but it wasn't that bad then. Then I left and I was gone for a year or so, and my mom and I would call and talk to my mom and my sister were still getting together on Sunday nights and stuff like that. That was our time to communicate with each other. And then it got to the point where my sister wasn't coming over anymore, and it was just me calling and talking to my mom, which that was fine. I love her, but I was wondering what's going on with my sister. So my mom would tell me things about her, which seemed really weird. And I thought to myself, it's not that I didn't believe my mom, but it was like, Mom, are you getting all the details right? I mean, is this really right? And it just seemed, and it got worse, and I was like really concerned. So I started talking to my wife, and even though we wanted to stay in Peru, it was like we had to pray and say, Lord, I feel like I need to go back home because it's just messed up. The stuff I'm hearing from Mom, you know, Mom's got her right mind and everything. So even though she's older, so I mean, this can't. What's going on here? So then Mom called me one time and she told me that she was really concerned because she got her bank statement and there was a chunk of money for me anyway, which was huge, and it was gone, and it was like, or less than what it should have been. And I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. I don't know. Now my sister and me were put on my mom's account, and here's the catch, only, and we both fully understood this, so that if she got incapacitated, we could pay the bills or do something else. Now we didn't know any different. Everything at that time, which was even years before that, everything was cool. Everything was fine. So we never, ever would have imagined ourselves getting into the situation that we got in. Okay? So we just took all that at face value. We trusted each other, and that was good. It's kind of like our founding fathers. They tried to think of every eventuality they could when they wrote the Constitution. And we're facing things today that no man would have ever thought of. They just couldn't have imagined every scenario. So anyway, it was kind of like that. So my oldest sister and her husband flew out from California to Alabama, and they went to try and figure out what was going on with my mom. And at that time, we found out there was another thing going on, and so my sister actually bought a car without telling anybody and went and got the money out of my mom's account that she was supposed to be living off of, and I don't know. My mind's blown because at that time I was like, what? I mean, even if we were on the account, even if there were no little idiosyncrasies or little details as to why we could access the money or not, don't you think that if you went to a bank and you're on the account, but you're not the main account holder, don't you think the person would at least ask, this is kind of a red flag, it's a lot of money, maybe we should call your mom or whoever is the main account holder and find out if this is cool? No, they just gave it to her. So now all this money is gone, and I'm like, wow, what's Mom going to do? So my sister and her husband flew back and they said, okay, none of this. Okay, first thing we do, my sister's off that account, number one. Number two, she's off any, executorship or co-trustee thing in her will and all that kind of stuff. We got to straighten this out. So my sister did. But while my wife and I put things into work and started filing paperwork and documents and all that with the embassies and all that, it took almost a year before we could get back here. So my older sister straightened that out, but this is not the problem. Okay, the problem is now that my younger sister is isolated herself. She's mentally off, and very off. I'm sorry, but she was. And so my wife and I first came back. We went back to her house because my wife was supposed to get her permanent resident card, and we thought it was coming to that house for some reason. So we went there to say hi to my sister and find out what was going on with her and kind of figure that out for ourselves rather than just take Mom's, summation and synopsis of all things. And so, of course, she'd thrown that in the mail or throw out the trash. So we had to get more money and more time to redo all that stuff. But the first thing she says is, do you want to come in and talk and find out about my world? And I was like, sure, okay. So we go in there, my wife and I and her, and we sit down and we listen to her for like an hour and a half, and she is off the charts. I mean, she's thought out everything very well, and it's very logical if you want to say that, because everything was well thought out and connected and all that, except that it was like a totally non-reality kind of universe, So that's the world we started living in for a while. Now, I bring all of that up because there's a scripture that I'm very familiar with, and you might be too. Okay, at least the title of it, or a parable that Jesus gave, you might be familiar with it even if you've never read it. And this became very, very real and very, very personal for me at this point, okay? And after I went over my sister's house, sometimes she'd let us come in, sometimes she wouldn't, sometimes she'd answer the door, sometimes she wouldn't, and after a while I just kind of got more towards the wouldn't part, even on birthdays or Christmas or Thanksgiving and things like that. So I got to the point, because I live even further away, it took me a good 45 minutes to get out there, so it was intentional, and I did it all the time. Well, maybe once a month or something, but for me that was pretty often. But then it got to the point where she just wasn't answering the door anymore, and I finally thought, well, you know what? It's been the last several visits, so I'm just not going to do this anymore. It's not that I don't love her. It's not that I'm not concerned for her. But if she's not even going to answer the door or open any kind of literal door of communication with me or whatever, then I'm just not going to do that anymore. So I started praying heavily, heavily, relying on the Father to do what I knew at that point I couldn't do. And I probably should have done that in the beginning, because I always did pray. But you know, when you love somebody and you got ties to them and you got these emotions going on, I mean, you can't just sit back and do nothing yourself. At least that's what you feel, you know. So I did everything I could do with God, and now I got to the point where I was doing nothing, and it was all God, you know, and it was trusting in Him, and trusting in what He could do, and what I couldn't see, and and all those things, and His timing, and not my timing, and all this is even with the fact that even though authority begins and ends with Him, and He is sovereign. But He's made us free individuals, okay? And even though He's got the ability and the right to do it, He's the potter, we're the clay, okay? He's the sovereign king, we're just servants, you know? And sometimes we're obedient servants, and sometimes we're very rebellious servants, okay? But He still is not going to just come in and just swoop in and take control, whether it's for good or for bad sometimes. Sometimes He does, but not all the time. You know, this is the mind of God. I read the Bible constantly. I love Him. He reveals Himself to me, but there's still things that we just won't ever know. I mean, the Bible is very huge, and we can read it through in a year, but that doesn't mean we can understand all of its nuances. We can't understand the original language to the degree that English can convey, and there's just a lot of things we'll just never know. And some things God just keeps to Himself, and that's cool, because He can and because He does. And even if, you know, we don't know how gravity works all the time. I don't have a mind to understand E equals mc squared, but you know, it doesn't matter even if you do explain it to me. I just know that it works, and I live in that realm, and I trust it to work, and it does. Doesn't mean I have to know everything about it. Okay, so anyway, let me read this to you. Okay, let me read this to you. It says, it's called the parable of the prodigal son. I know you've heard that before, but my subtitle for this message, for us relating to each other this way, for me sharing with you, is the Father, God the Father, is not an enabler. Okay, and this is true, and we'll get into this later. It's found in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. And again, God has shown me this is where my sister is at. And many of you may be there or know people that are there. And so I hope this is extremely helpful to you, even if it doesn't answer every question, even if you're struggling with the when or the how or the why and all those things. Okay, it starts by saying, and he said, in other words, Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that's coming to me. In other words, give me my inheritance. And the father divided his property between the 2 sons. And not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but he didn't get anything. And this is a key verse. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, but within visual range, I'm adding, his father saw him and felt compassion, and he ran and he embraced him and he kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, but he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found." And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things might mean. And the servant said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry, and he refused to go in. And his father came out and begged him and entreated him, and he answered him, "Father, look, these many years I've served you, and have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me even a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother of yours was dead, and now he's alive, and he was lost, and now he's found." Okay, so I know you hear that, and I wonder what's going through your mind as you pour over your situation, or think about things you used to know, or somebody else you used to know, or whatever, or something you might have to end up dealing with. Okay, but this became very real for me, because my sister took something that didn't belong to her. She took the property, and she squandered it. She didn't go a far country, but in her mind she did, because she was in a totally different reality place. And when I went over another time shortly after we got back from Lima, my mom had agreed to sell some property that my sister had thought she was getting, or something else, as if she hadn't gotten enough already. And she got mad at me, and I was like trying to tell her nicely, kindly, by the grace of God, that this just wasn't right. She'd already helped herself to a bunch of stuff, and I asked her, I said, "Why did you do this? This is not you. Why did you do this?" And she said, "I thought Mom was dead." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "How did you?" I couldn't even form the words. I was like, "How did you think Mom was dead?" I said, "What reason did you have for that? I mean, even if you did think she was dead, you bought this car. Could you not drive over to her house and check it out? She had a phone. Could you not call her? Could you not ask one of her friends? Could you not get in touch with her church? Could you not check the what do they call this? The obituaries? Could you not, reach out to a funeral home, or the place where my dad had already been buried? We knew my mom was going to be buried there too. I mean, you had all these avenues, count them, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, I don't know how many, that you could have reached out to, even if you felt like this kind of happened. Could you not verify it? Did you even want to? What went on in your thought process? I don't know. And so she got mad at me. I thought, well, be mad at me. I mean, I wasn't doing it coldly or callously. Really, I was really one of the only ones in the family that had compassion left for her, But I had to understand I was dealing with a certain reality, and at the same time I had to have compassion with her. And at the same time I had to deal with, how to try and get her back to normal, and pray for her, and still be a trustee of the will, at which my mom eventually did die, and now we're having to deal with all that, and that's taken like 2.5 years. And so we're at the point where, I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. I never did. Okay, but the little house that my sister's living in, we have to sell, because Mom wanted and Dad wanted us to share that equally, whatever it comes to. I don't know. That's not the point. I don't care about that. But the point is that, she's got to vacate the premises, and she's not doing that. And so I had to get a lawyer involved. It's the last thing I want to do. And he's got to get into this thing they call an eviction, or an evictment, and she's not renting a property, so it's not eviction. And they've tried reaching out to her, and she's not answering the mail. She's not responding to the certified letters. And now we've gone to the court, and the judge is giving her, 2 or 3 chances to make sure every avenue is given to her to respond or make a claim or do any of this stuff, you know. So now after 2.5 years, we're finally get to the point where nobody wants to be at as far as having to deal with my sister and maybe evict her out of the house where she may not have a place to live and all this stuff. But as a trustee, as co-trustee, but as sole executor of the will, as small as it is, I have to, you know, distribute the funds and close the account and get all that probate will stuff done over and done with, and that's my responsibility. So God's graciously given me, you know, a compassion for my sister and an ability to have a peaceful heart about the whole situation. So on the one hand, I'm praying and praying and praying fervently so we can get an answer of some kind and follow and have the will and the grace and the ability to follow and patience to follow God's timeline, because he's working behind the scenes on her heart. I know, because he loves her, because he died for her so that she could be forgiven and have her right mind back and have eternity with him. So he's dealing with all that while I'm trying to pray on her behalf, while I'm also trying to deal with the realities of getting her out of the house so I can sell it, so I can distribute whatever we're getting out of that house, which is a blessing, even though I don't want anything. But if I'm able to get it, praise God for that, whatever it is. But I've got 4 other brothers and sisters besides me and my sister that I have to deal with. And, you know, it's just a mess, you know. And it's been going on for a long time. And my older sister, who's co-trustee with me now, she's emailed me yesterday and said, you know, maybe this will be the year that all this can be over and done with, you know, because we're. And the other bad thing is too, money that we're supposed to have, which I'm not about the money, but money that mom and dad wanted us to have, you know, is now being tied up. And because mom, what I meant to mention earlier, is not was never making my sister get a job and start getting back into paying her own bills again, because my mom was getting older and she knew she was going to die at some point. She didn't want, you know, to have a finality of an adversarial relationship define, you know, their final years together. And so she just kind of blew that off. And so she started just paying the bills, you know, the light bill, the gas bill, somebody to mow the lawn, and, you know, the water and all this other kind of stuff. And I told her that it was wrong, and she knew it, but she just couldn't bring herself to do it. So now that she's gone, we're dealing with that, you know. So there's all this horrible stuff going on that we're having to deal with. And now, since everything went to probate, which is just now winding up, we're having to pay that the stuff that mom was continuing to pay to my sister, which is the gas, the light, and that's coming out of all of our inheritance. You know, again, I don't know how much we're getting at this point. I don't know. I don't care. But it's wrong that my sister did what she did before, and it's even more wrong now that my brothers and sisters should have to have whatever they're getting shaken down, because that's being paid to my sister, because that's all tied up in probate. So you can see this is awful. It's awful. So I trust God implicitly, although I don't like having to deal with all these things, but God's given me the grace to be able to deal with it with patience. And on one hand, be firm in the truth and do what my duties are, and at the same time have enough compassion, you know, to still pray for her and not get all bitter and torn up inside and get, you know, ugly and even and resentful and all that stuff. So I praise him for that. But the point in sharing all that and being personal, transparent, and vulnerable about all that is because what you have to understand is God used this story in a very real sense. So, you know, verse 17, okay, verses 16 and 17 said, he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything, excuse me. But verse 17 says, but when he came to himself, and some versions, even in the original Greek, say, when he got his right mind back, okay? Now, whether he was as bad off as my sister, or whether he was just not thinking right because he wasn't acting responsibly. He thought about himself only and wanted to be by himself, so he went to his dad even before he died and said, give me my share of the inheritance and let me go live how I want to, you know? And his dad said, okay. I'm sure he wasn't happy with it. He didn't want his son to leave. He didn't want him to, he knew his son well, and he probably knew exactly what he was going to do and didn't want to give it to him, but he said, okay. And see, that's the way God is. God doesn't want us to do those things. So when we get ourselves in a mess and we say, why, God, why? Why don't we ask, why Ken, why? Or why Susan, Susan? Or why John, John? Or, why don't we ask ourselves why we got ourselves in that mess? We don't want to accept any blame. We don't want to accept any responsibility. And we don't want to accept any accountability. In fact, we don't even let our hearts or our minds go there. In fact, we go to Almighty God because we know whether we follow after Him, whether we trust in Him, whether we've given our lives to Him, whether we know we're going to heaven or not, whether we live according to His perfect ways or not, we know on a basic instinctual human conscience level, we know that God is the creator and the authority of all the universe. And so what do we do when we get in trouble? Or, we want to go to the authority figure, the one that can straighten it out for us because he's got the ability, he's got the authority. He can tell someone else to do something or he can do it himself. We do it all the time whether we realize it or not. Now that you've listened to this, you'll probably pick up on this more and more and more. Little kids do the same thing. We think they're innocent. When I was teaching in Lima, Peru, I didn't teach little kids, but sometimes when I had my lunch duty, I would see these, 4, 5, 6-year-old kids, and they'd get into a fight, these little boys or somebody, and the first thing they'd do is want to go find a teacher. Why? Because this boy believed he was in the right, this other boy believed he was in the right, and by finding a teacher, that was their authority in their world that could come straighten the situation out, hopefully in their favor, even though they may not have obeyed the teacher's rules, they might not have obeyed the school's rules, and that's why they got in a fight and had an issue to begin with. But when they needed something straightened out for their benefit, the first one they did is went and found an authority figure, which was a teacher. Okay, so it's not very different whether we're 10 or 50 or 80 years old or 4 years old. The human nature is the same. So the thought went into it that this guy said, I don't appreciate what I have. I don't like living here. I don't like being in your house, Dad, even though you're taking care of me and feeding me and even giving me a place to live. I want what I've got coming to me even before you die. So give it to me and let me run off and do whatever I want with it. And that's exactly what he did. But the father didn't say, no, son, you don't get the inheritance, because you've been acting badly or whatever. God says, I love you and I know you're going to end up in a bad place, but you have a free will. So as much as I know you're going to go off on the wrong path, and it's going to hurt you, and it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be painful for you, none of those things do I want for you. But I know you have your own free will, and as a free, sentient creature that I made you, I have to give you the ability to accept me or reject me, to obey according to my perfect rules or disobey them. Get yourself in trouble or walk in blessing, okay? Choose life or choose death, as Joshua would say, okay? So he's not going to make us do that. Now, the funny thing is, when we're in a problem, we look back and we kind of think, well, why didn't you make me? Why don't you come save me? Why didn't you keep me in your protected boundaries? Okay, and we said, well, because you're a human being. You got to have a choice. When things are going good for you, but you don't like the boundaries that you're in that are protective for you and good for you, you want to go beyond those boundaries. I'm not going to hedge you in and say, no, you can't go, but I don't want you to go because I know what's going to happen to you. But I got to let you make that choice. So you make that choice rebelliously, and you go on about your business thinking, wow, great. I got money, I got clothing, I got freedom, yada, yada. I can do whatever I want. Well, that's not going to last forever. That's not going to end well. And it doesn't. He ended up feeding pigs. Okay? And it's noteworthy to notice that when he had spent everything, verse 14 says, a severe famine arose. So those things happened at the same time. He ran out of all his resources and a famine came at the same time. So he was up the creek, right? He needed something. But only because of that desperation, you might look at that and say, God, why would you allow me to run out of money and resources? Why would you allow the famine to happen at the same time? Aren't you in control? Don't you love me? And God's like, yeah, but you know what? I'm not just going to give you a free ride. I'm not a genie. I'm not here for you to snap your fingers at or say, I'm going to disobey you. I don't want anything to do with you until you actually need me for something. Then you come to me, and then I'm just supposed to say, okay, yeah, I'm God of the universe, and you're just a tiny little ant on the face of the earth, which is my footstool, and I'm supposed to just come running to you whenever you snap your fingers or get yourself into trouble, especially after you've disobeyed me and run out of the protective and wonderful, blessed boundaries that I've set for you. Now you're going to come to me, a tiny little speck of an ant. You want to come to the God of the universe and say, get me out of this jam? No, it doesn't work that way, nor should it. So he got himself into this mess. And I read this so many times, because this is where my sister was and is. Okay, but another thing too is I realized this, God showed me later after reading this a number of times. What does it say in verse 15? He went and hired himself out, which my sister was not willing to do. There's a lady across the street that she went to and asked to get her groceries rather than get a job. And the lady was 75 years old. You can imagine she's on a fixed income, but she felt bad, so she got my sister some groceries. And she did it a few times with other members of this lady's family, believe it or not. Now, you got to keep in mind she doesn't have her right mind, but it's the decisions that she made that led her to the point where she closed herself off and didn't read the Bible and didn't talk to other people and started hearing, Satan's voice and her own selfish voice in her own head that led to her being in this weird mental place. So you can have compassion on her, but they're a result of her own choices, her own bad choices, her own personal, obvious choices. She knew she made those choices, and she did, and they get you down a wrong path. Sometimes it's one by one, and years later you get to a place, how did I ever get here? Okay, if you even ask yourselves this question. But this is where she's at. But what God showed me was that this lady said, Angie, I don't have any more money to give you, but I can maybe let you clean my house once every couple of weeks and give you some money for that. And her response was, no, your house is dirty. And she was like, what? Of course it's dirty, otherwise I wouldn't ask you to clean it. But I mean, if you're in that position and you're humble and you're destitute and you're begging for food, literally, would you not say, thank you? Yes, I've got a chance at making some money, and all I got to do is clean your house. I don't need a car. You're right across the street. You're willing to help me. Doesn't matter that you're an old lady on a fixed income. All those things. That's awful. It's awful. So she was very prideful. And yet she thinks she's humble, and she thinks she's meek because she's telling herself and buying the lie that Satan's giving her that, yeah, I'm in this really bad position and I don't want to be in this position, but you know what? I can live. I've learned to live off so little. I'm not prideful. I don't want a lot. I just want a little bit. But you've got a shopping center, within walking distance that you could go even get a part-time job since we're still paying all your bills. Could you not go there and get some money, even part-time, and then feed yourself, and you'd be not having to worry about all this? But instead, you don't have your right mind anymore, and you're thinking to yourself that you're living meekly when you don't have to, and you're begging for stuff, and then someone gives you an opportunity, and you say no. Wow. Wow. Now, granted, you're not in your right mind, so it's not just a snubbing kind of thing and an arrogant kind of thing, but it still is. If you really were in a place of need like this guy was, wouldn't you go out and feed the pigs? She wasn't even willing to do that. Now she is begging for food. I don't even know how I'm giving her gift cards, but only once in a long, long while. Why? Because I don't always have the money, but even when I do, I'm not enabling her. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, but what God was showing me was not just that, but he was saying, you know what? Jews and Muslims too, and other people in other countries, okay, pigs are, I don't know why, but they're very, very dirty animals to them. It's something they don't even touch or deal with. They don't eat pork. They don't raise pork. They don't buy pork. They don't deal with pork. They don't touch them. They don't clean them. They don't do anything. They don't even own them if they have a farm. Okay, that's just a defiled animal, something they don't deal with. So God showed me, not only is he that bad off that he's lost all his money and a severe famine is coming at the same time, and he's having to go out and hire himself out to somebody in a foreign country that he doesn't even know in order to make a living so that he can eat. Okay, but he's feeding the pigs. A defiled animal, something they would normally have nothing to do with, okay? And in this culture, Jesus was dealing with Jews, okay? It wasn't until when Peter and Paul went out later that the Gentiles got the gospel. So this message was to the Jews. So the Jews understood. Not only was he in a bad way, but he was so low, he was feeding pigs. People an animal that he would never even had anything to do with. So he was the low, okay? He was very base. But then verse 17 says, but when he came to himself, that means either he didn't have a right mind or he did, or he had a wrong way of thinking, but he came about to the right way of thinking, or he got destitute enough, he realized, this sucks, I've got to do something different, forget my pride, I've got to feed myself, or whatever. Or even in my sister's case, you go from being mentally unstable to Having your right mind. Now, I've been praying, God, when is she going to come to verse 17 in her life? When is she going to realize how bad verse 16 is? When is she going to have 17? That's the turning point, and that's my prayer for her. When is she going to realize it doesn't have to be this way? All she has to do is realize that she strayed from the Father, and she needs to come back. She needs to realize, I've sinned before heaven and before you. I just want to be, I don't even want to be a member of your family anymore. I realize I'm a servant. I'm a sinner. I need to be just a hired servant, just so I can get some food. I'm not even coming back to say, hey, Dad, I want to have things back the way they were. Can I get my old room, my old bed back? Can I do this? Can I do that? He was humbled. He had the right attitude. He realized he was wrong. That's what having his right mind meant. He went from being prideful to being humble. He went to being, it's all about me, to know it's about you. It's about sinning to being righteous. It's about not having forgiveness, not wanting it, to knowing I need it and wanting it desperately. And so the Father let him go, knowing he was going to get into this mess. But he couldn't go out there and say, you're 18, 20, 25, whatever this kid is. No, you're a grown man. I can't just hold you in and say, no, you can't go. I have to let you make those mistakes. And he had to go to those lengths. And if he had money, he would have kept on going. He would have kept on going. God had to graciously let him go through something that in our minds and our hearts is terrible, unthinkable. But God doesn't just think about the here and now. God thinks about the eternity. Even though he cares deeply about every aspect of our lives, and he doesn't want these things to happen for us, this is still just a 50, 60, 70, 80 year existence. Sometimes people die at 20 and 30. We're hearing about kids nowadays that are dying at 5, 10, 15 years old from different things. They either, find a gun in their parents' house and accidentally shoot themselves, or they die because of famine, or, child abuse, or whatever. So it's not just something that happens to old people. It happens to people, kids as low as 1, 2, 3 years old to 70, 80 years old. Okay? So we've got to come back to the Father. If not, he's not going to make us. He's very generous, and he's very patient and long-suffering. He doesn't wish anyone to perish. He didn't make us to die. He made us to live. And he didn't make us just to live on this earth. He meant for us to live eternally with him in heaven, where things are glorious and splendid and majestic and better than anything we could even think about. There are people in the Bible that saw visions of heaven, and they were so different, so other than what we could even explain and relate to, that they had to relate to him in terms that seemed very, very strange to us. We can hardly even relate to him. Ezekiel did that. Isaiah did that. Okay? So wherever you are, this could be you. You could be the prodigal son. And a prodigal doesn't mean the lost one, like everyone thinks it does. It means wasteful. So we taking this life that God has given us and wasting it, and one day we're going to be before him in the judgment as much as he loves us. And we're going to have to face that judgment. And we're going to have to feed the pigs. And we're going to go to the base of the base of the base, the low of the low. And we're going to have to go to a place no one wants to go. No one even wants to speak its name. And it's called hell. It's the lake of fire. That's just a reality. And if we don't talk about it, if we water over it, or gloss over it, or sugar it up, or water it down, and dance around the issue with the offensive culture and the hypersensitive culture, and dance on eggshells and don't want to make anybody mad, then we won't make anybody mad, and we'll be friends with everybody, but they're all not going to go to heaven. They're going to go to hell, and it's going to be miserable, and it's going to be for eternity, and it's never going to end. If we love people, we don't tell them that. We want to tell them. We have to risk telling people things that are uncomfortable. We have to risk relationships, people turning their backs on us and calling us names and saying, get away from me, never call me that anymore. I don't want to do these things. I don't want to be the one to have to deal with, and you know what I'm finding out? I'm finding out that if she doesn't respond, okay, the judge said you have to put this notice in her local newspaper for 30 days. So she has a chance to be notified of this, because we tried to reach out to her by mail, by certified mail. We can't reach her by telephone. She's not she's not responding to, even if we put it in her normal mail and she read it, she might be thinking, this isn't me. We get bad news we don't want to hear. Somebody says something we want to hear, and little kids go, no, 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 but we have to hear it. So in the back of her mind, she knows this day is coming, but she's not acting upon it, so it's going to be thrust upon her. I've told her, I'll help you. I'll help you get your driver's license back, because even if you do make it to the point where you get some money, you're going to have a bank account. You're going to have to be able to cash the check, right? So you're going to have a driver's license or an ID that's good. It's in date. It's updated. I can help you do that. I'll even pay for it if I can. I'll do some of those small things for you. But you're going to have to do some things yourself. I'm not going to enable you. And here's the deal. You might be thinking, why, God, why? Why? Because you got yourself into that place, or that person got themselves into that place. Okay? And you can't bail people out. Now, I had a boss at one time who was not a nice man, but now I understand why. And he used to have to take phone calls from his wife sometimes while he was at work, and he didn't want to. And he'd go into another office and shut the door, but we could still hear him. We didn't want to, but we couldn't leave our room, and we had to listen to that. So he would, I could tell from what I heard, even though I didn't know the details, that his wife wanted their grown son, who was 30-something, to get out of jail. And he, the father, knew as much as he wanted him to get out of jail, he knew that he couldn't just go bail him out. Why? Because if he did, then if he didn't have to suffer a consequence for that, if he didn't have to get discipline, loving but hard discipline for that, which Hebrews chapter 12 talks about, okay, then we're not likely at all to change our behavior. Because if I screw up and I go to jail, I have to make a call and say, Dad, Mom, I got in jail and I'm 30-something years old and I got here because I did drugs, because I was drunk driving. I mean, that's hard to swallow to have to admit, but maybe it's not for you, but most people it would be. But that's your only vehicle to getting out of jail. That's your only means to get out of the situation that you're in. So you make the call. And then your mom, because she's loving and women are tender, and they want to help their children in any way possible. They don't like them to hurt at all, nor do guys, but God's made us at the heads of the household if we're doing our jobs. And we have the ability to feel that way, but still act in the way we know we're supposed to. So the woman was like, oh, we got to bail him out. We got to get him out of jail. We got to get him out of jail. And the husband, the father is like, no, we can't. Why? Because if we do, especially the first time, then you think he's going to walk away from it? Maybe, but most likely if he's in the addiction stage, which I think this young guy was, then he's going to go back to doing it again, and then he's going to get in jail again. Then he's going to want us to bail him out again, blah, 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 blah. And even if we have the money, what lesson is that going to teach him? Yeah, I can bail him out every single time, but that's going to just keep him in that destructive behavior. It's going to keep that lifestyle in motion. And that's not good, okay? That's not good. If it eats your heart up to see him go through it once, what about again and again and again and again? And the father had the insight to know that I've got to be hard, even though I feel just like you do. It's not that I'm being harsh. It's not that I'm being cold. But I've got to let him go to that place of depravity and hit the low of lows so that he'll stop that behavior, so he can live and not die and get out of his addiction and not end up dead one day, which unfortunately, after I left that job, I ran into this man. It was my boss in Hardee's a few years later, and he had a different expression on his face. He didn't seem so hard, and he told me, my son passed away. And I could tell that he came to peace with it, not because he stopped being a pain in the butt as a son, but because it was horrible, but at least he wasn't doing that anymore. But do you think that son went to heaven? I'm sure he didn't. So what do? Do you placate these people? Do you act out of your emotion to help them, that makes them in a better place temporarily and makes you feel better because you did something good and compassionate? And you satisfied that feeling in your heart that you didn't like? Or do you be like the father of the prodigal son? Are you like God the Father, and you let the people make their own decisions, even though you know they're going to be disastrous and harmful and hurtful for them? You don't like it. You don't want it at all. But you can't ensnare them. You can't do that. You have to let them go their own way. And it takes them getting to a very, very low and debased place for them to turn around and get their right mind back and be humble and be willing to want forgiveness and to receive forgiveness, and spiritually speaking, to place themselves under the lordship of the Lord Jesus Christ and get forgiveness of sins, and not go back to the way you were because you got your butt saved a couple of times, but to repent and to turn, to change your mind, to change the way you think, and receive the forgiveness that God wants you to have, and then walk in blessing and in right relationship with the Father here on earth, but for all eternity. That's what you've got to do. Even now my heart is pumping with emotion, with the Holy Spirit speaking to me, because God's welled me up with that living water inside that Jesus told the woman at the well about. You've got to do that, and I've got to do it too. So I know I might have to face the day, and the last thing the guys told me is after they put her name in this notice in the newspaper for 30 days, then they've got to give her 30 days to respond. And if she doesn't, then the last option is to tell the sheriff to go over and knock on her door. And this is literal. I asked. And take the door off the hinges, tell her to get out and vacate the premises and take whatever is inside the house and take it and put it out on the sidewalk. And that's what I have to face. And I don't want to at all. But that's what I have to do. But this is because of the choices that she's made. And I'm praying that she'll come to verse 17 and come to her right mind before that happens. I hope this taught you something and let you know that God doesn't enable you. When you ask, why, God, why? It's why me? Why did I make those decisions? Why did I make those choices? Why did I rebel against you? Why did I turn my back on your salvation? Why did I turn my back on your love and your offer of salvation and your forgiveness of sins? Why did I do that? I got myself in this mess. And then if I did get to that mess, then I'll know, now I know why you had to let me do that. And I know I needed to get to this place in order to turn around and come to you. And if not, then my own choices that you had to give me as a free, sentient human being with the ability to choose. I had to come to that. So it's a good thing in terms of eternity. As painful as it might be on earth. And to have to stand back and watch it and let it happen. But the greater thing is the long term. So let's hope that happens. But the worst thing would be to suffer the consequences here on earth and still have to face them for eternity. Don't let that happen to yourself or to your loved one. Thank you for listening. I hope it speaks to your heart. God bless you. And may this be a good year, even in the midst of the bad that's certainly going to come at some point. God bless you.